Welcome to Genealogy 101. Today we're going to cover the basics of researching your family history. Let's start with your very first steps. You want to start slowly. Get advice. You don't want to rush in and end up having to redo your work. So read books and guides and blogs, listen to videos like this one, ask some experts who have experience, start doing your research as to how to do your research before you get started. Decide on a software program or online program to record your research. You want to decide carefully because you'll be using it for years. You also want to make sure that you choose a software that can export to a GED file, which is a special family tree file that is compatible with lots of different products out there. So for example, Ancestry.com, you can download a GED file. You want to decide on an organization plan and stick with it. Lots of the online resources will have suggestions for keeping track of your research. I have an example here of a research extract where you keep track of what you've looked for and where you've looked for it, what you found and where you found it, and where else you need to look, what information specifically you haven't come up with that you need to look elsewhere for. I always recommend the book Evidence Explained, Citing History Sources from Artifacts to Cyberspace by Elizabeth Shown Mills. She is like the godmother of genealogy. She is an absolute genius when it comes to genealogy, and so her book is very useful. We have a copy available at Central and at North River, so ask your librarian for that book if you're interested. Next, you want to document what you already know. Record what you know about all your family members, their full names, their birth and death places and dates, where they lived, what schools they went to, facts about their marriages, including their spouse's name. That's pretty important. Anything else you can think of about the family members that you know, write it down. And then interview family members. It's best to start with family members who are older than you and have a good memory. So the older someone is, the more people in your family that they are likely to have known. And of course, the good memory is very helpful. You want to take multiple sessions to do these interviews and have specific questions prepared. So don't say, tell me about your life. Say, where did you go to school in 3rd grade? Who was your best friend? What did you wear when you got married? Ask very specific questions because you'll get more information that way. And it might prompt them to remember other things as well. And you can always give them the time to ramble on because you'll never know what facts you'll get. And plus, people love sharing their life. Uncover your family records. There are so many one-of-a-kind items that your family is the only place that you're going to find such a thing. I mean, you can find official state records in multiple places, but you're only going to find those family photos or letters or diaries in your family's possession. And then when you find those things, digitize them whenever you can. You'll never know when there's going to be a flood or a fire or a fight over who gets to keep the documents or something of that nature. So if you can keep a backup digital copy, that is the best possible thing to do. So let's talk about different types of records. We're going to start with those family records that I mentioned. So you'll find official state records for things like birth, marriage, and death, my first few things here. But you'll also find personal papers that can help give you information about these life events. For example, for birth, you might find birth announcements, baby books, hospital bills, anything like that. You know, whoever paid for that baby to be born is likely to be a very close family member. For marriage, you might find wedding, shower, or anniversary invitations, legal documents, such as divorce certificates. For death, you might find memorial cards, burial records, a funeral bill, coroner's reports, the guest book from the funeral. For travel, you might find passports, receipts, itineraries, and maps. Organizational documents might include membership cards, receipts from different functions. Medical can include immunization records, bills, insurance statements. So again, just like the baby's birth, whoever's paying for a child's medical is probably a close family member or friend or, someone very close to that baby or child who you might be able to then use to track down more information later. Photographs can be very useful for clues and placing people in context. I think it's also valuable to remember who you're researching and so that they're not just, black and white name on a page, but add some color and remember the actual person you're researching. So the pictures I actually have on the screen here are from my family collection from we're like 99% sure that this is the old family house in Waynesboro, Georgia. And the woman in the doorway in the bottom picture is my great-great-grandmother with her 4 children in front of her. So this probably would have been taken round about 1905 would be my guess. Unfortunately, we don't know when it was taken, but anyway, the point is you can kind of get a picture of where this family lived and what their life was like. So I think it's important to remember more than just the black and white facts, because the point of the genealogy is you're learning about your family. Anyway, you might also find school records such as yearbooks, report cards, diplomas, medals, awards. That'll give you an idea of what kind of person your ancestor was in school. Correspondence, you never know what you'll find in somebody's letters. People would share when they went visiting, when they went on vacation, when their mother was sick. You might get all kinds of personal information that way. Bibles and other religious books were used to record life events for a long time, and in some cases still are. So you could find some birth, marriage, and death information in Bibles. And then all kinds of other things, trophies, scrapbooks, expired driver's licenses, address books, diaries. I actually have a diary of my grandmother's from when she was probably about 12 years old, which would have been in the late 30s. And she was talking about the crush she had on the boy down the street. And that is just something you're not going to find anywhere else and really brings the people you're researching alive. Next, we're going to talk about vital records, which is just a record of a life event kept under a governmental authority. So basically that boils down to birth, marriage and divorce, and death. Vital records haven't always existed. So for example, in the case of Virginia, birth and death registers were first started in 1853, but then they were only kept until 1896. And then there was a period where the state did not keep an official record. And then starting in 1912, the birth and death certificates like we know today were kept starting then. And then marriage and divorce records just for Virginia began in 1853. So I have vitalcheck.com listed here. They're the exclusive online vital records partner for over 450 government agencies. So there's a good chance if you need to order a newer vital record, that's where you'll get it. A lot of vital records that are old enough where there isn't a concern for privacy are available in some of the free resources that I'll show you in a little bit here. If you're not sure how to request records for a particular locality, we have a really great resource at the reference desk at the Central Branch called the International Vital Records Handbook by Thomas J. Kemp. And it tells you who to contact and what information you need in all 50 states and internationally. So it is a really helpful resource if you're trying to track down vital records. Next, we'll talk about U.S. federal records. So when you're just getting into genealogy research, the number one thing you will probably be using is the U.S. Census. The census is available publicly 72 years after it was taken. This is a privacy issue. So the 1950 census was just made available last year, which was very exciting. It'll be a really important record to start piecing together your family tree if your family has been in the U.S. for a significant amount of time. The first census was in 1790, but the first surviving federal census of Virginia is 1810, and then the 1890 census also is missing. So one thing about records you'll be using for genealogy is a lot of these are stored in courthouses that were set fire to at some time, or were in some other way damaged or destroyed because they were on paper, and paper does not last forever. So that is worth taking note of. And then some states also did their own censuses, so you might find more data there. The entire household is listed starting in 1850. Before that, it was just the head of household with a tally of the other family members. Immigration records can be helpful when you're doing genealogy research, and of course, the federal government cares about who's coming in and out of the country, so you might find passenger lists, customs lists, naturalization papers. Military records are prolific. If you have an ancestor who was in the military, I don't think any organization keeps more records than the U.S. military. So you might find draft records, enlistment, muster rolls, personnel files, pension records, compiled service records, casualty list, regimental histories. The possibilities are endless if you have an ancestor who served in the military. And then Social Security, you will find both application records and the death index. So that can be helpful for finding a more recent ancestor's death date, which can help you then find more information. Keep in mind that Social Security numbers were issued starting in 1936, so no one who died before then would have one. Okay, other records that you might find when you're doing your research include court records. So, marriage and divorce, land and property records, including some maps, tax rolls, voter registration, guardianship and adoption, asylum and institution. So, if you have an ancestor who was put in the poorhouse, you would find those records there, or an orphan who was kept in an orphanage, you would probably find those with the local court. City directories are kind of like a glorified phone book. They usually would have um, a list by name and then also by street, so you could see where people lived and what their address, their phone number, and usually for married couples, it would have the spouse's name as well. And the one interesting fact that you can get from city directories is a lot of times the person's occupation would be listed, so you could find out if someone was a lawyer or a banker or a grocer. Let's see. Church records can be really valuable, especially for the farther back in time that you go. As I said, the state did not start keeping records for things like births, marriages, and deaths. And up until a certain point, when the church was the center of the community, at least for those of European ancestry, it was the center of local life. The government didn't keep those records, and so the church was the one recording all of those. Birth, marriage, death. And those can be really helpful farther back in time, along with those family Bibles. Newspapers can contain birth and marriage announcements, obituaries, hospital admissions, farm reports, police activity. Particularly in like the mid 20th century, there was regularly columns of just social goings on. So if someone was visiting from out of town, that might be listed. You can find some really interesting things in the newspaper. My example I have on the screen here is actually a marriage announcement, followed by, and this is from about, I think this is about the 19 teens, I want to say, but it's a marriage announcement from the Daily News Record, and then somebody arrived for the wedding that was announced, and then somebody else threw a party for the bride. So you can find out about a person's family and friends that way. You also could find some business and institutional records, which I think are particularly helpful if your ancestor was the business owner. And then cemetery records. If something was important enough to be chiseled into stone, there's a pretty good chance that that fact is true, or that somebody really believed it enough to put it in stone. So cemetery records can be very useful as well. So let's talk about some online resources where you can find some of these records. We'll start with what's available from MRL. We have access to Ancestry Library Edition, which I'm sure I do not need to tell you what Ancestry.com is, but Ancestry Library Edition is the same thing as the personal subscription, except for the library pays for the subscription. You can only use it on site in the library, and the one big difference between the personal subscription is that you're not able to create your own family tree and save information to your family tree. But you can find the records and save them to your computer or send them to yourself via email. So you can still access all of those records. Heritage Quest is a similar product to Ancestry. It was once owned by a company called ProQuest, which is where its name comes from, but it's actually now owned by Ancestry. So there's a lot of overlap in the content between the two. There's probably more in Ancestry, but the benefit of Heritage Quest is that it is available at home. All you need is your library card. So that will have censuses, family history books, city directories, all kinds of information. If you're just getting started and you can't get into the library for whatever reason, Heritage Quest is an excellent source to start with. Then we also have Newsbank, which is an online newspaper collection. We have most of the local papers, and then it has, nationally and internationally tons of papers. But of course, for genealogy, local research, the local ones are the most important ones. Of course, if you're researching someone in Ohio, there's possibility that we have that Ohio newspaper that you might need too. These are more recent records. So like, for example, the Daily News record goes back to the early 1990s. One day we hope to provide a more comprehensive newspaper database, but for right now, we do have Newsbank, which is pretty useful. All right, then there's a lot of free online resources to use. Some that I like include Family Search, which is a free service of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So the Mormon Church has this huge family history library in Salt Lake City. They've digitized tons of records, so you can access a lot of the same stuff from that you would be able to find on Ancestry or Heritage Quest for free on their website. They also have local affiliate libraries where they will send things from their collection in Salt Lake City to the local library. Usually those are in Mormon churches, but it's a really great resource to use. Findagrave.com is a virtual cemetery, which I think it sounds funny, but it's kind of interesting because you can look at collections of cemeteries, see who is buried next to each other. A lot of people will put pictures of headstones or biographies of their relatives who have died. So it's kind of like a collaborative online community. So it gives people a place where they can remember their ancestors online. If they're not able to go to their actual grave, they can go visit this virtual grave. So you can search by the person's name, or you can just browse through a cemetery and see who's buried there. The Library of Virginia is the state library for the entire Commonwealth of Virginia. They have so many useful resources. I do not have time to talk about all of them, but I suggest you visit them online, if not in person. I will specifically mention their Virginia Chronicle project, which is a digitization project of Virginia newspapers. They have over 3 million pages and counting right now, including some that are local to us. It's just a really cool project. They have also been working on digitizing yearbooks. So for example, we sent all of the Broadway High School yearbooks that we have in our collection to the Library of Virginia for digitization, and now we have the physical copy, but anyone anywhere can access a digital copy. They also worked with Ancestry.com to create Ancestry for Virginians. They let Ancestry digitize a bunch of Virginia records, and in exchange, Ancestry agreed that anyone using a computer device in Virginia would have access to those records. Honestly, the easiest way to get to it is just to Google Ancestry for Virginians, and if you are in Virginia, you will be able to access all kinds of records, like death records, that came from the Library of Virginia's collection. And then, of course, there's always Google. I do not have time to give a whole spiel on using Google correctly for research, but proceed with caution when you use it. There's always going to be people who want to believe that they are a descendant of Charlemagne, and they will do whatever they can to make that family tree work. So just because you found something that somebody thinks that your family is connected, do your research, verify where they got their information. But Google is also, very useful for finding local historical societies and, niche collections of materials and connecting with other researchers. So just look before you leap and, make good use of Google and ask your librarian if you have any questions. Today, I really wanted to focus on things that you can do for free, but I will take time to mention briefly things that you can pay for that might be worth investigating once you get more into your research. Of course, Ancestry.com is a very widely known subscription, but we talked about the library has free access if you actually come into one of our 7 branches. Fold 3 is the most significant source of Anglo-centric military records. It covers the US, Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. There's several good newspaper archive websites online. I think Newspaper Archive and newspapers.com are probably 2 of the biggest. Newspapers really provide color to the plain facts of family history. I think some of the newspaper articles I found are just delightful, and I think they're some of the most fun things to find when doing research. So I'm all about using the newspapers. MyHeritage is an Israeli company that's really good for those with recent immigrant origins, or like if you're especially interested in finding cousins from overseas. Its strongest collections are for continental Europe, Scandinavia, and Jewish research. And then Find My Past is a good resource for people with roots in England, Scotland, Ireland, or Wales. There are millions of parish records, censuses, military and criminal records, and millions of British and Irish newspapers. So these are all paid subscriptions. They vary wildly in price. Most, if not all of them, will usually have a free trial, usually maybe 7 days or a few months. Not a few months, it's maybe 7 days or a month. I feel like a week's probably the most common. But if you find that, you want to dip your toes into a little more resources, and if you want to, if you have particularly like a week to really focus, I think it can be worth just trying a free trial and researching as much as you can in that short period, and see if it's worth it to you to actually pay for a subscription. So this is just a very short introduction, and most of the beginning stages of genealogy research these days take place in front of a computer screen. But don't forget physical records. Part of the fun of genealogy is getting out into the world. More advanced research can involve digging through records in libraries, archives, historical societies, courthouses, and more. And of course, your own attic, as we talked about earlier. And then trips to cemeteries can also provide useful information, and it's just a good opportunity to remember your ancestors out there in the physical world and think about the people that you're researching. All right, so I want to show you how we would go about researching a family, starting with what little information we know. So we are going to look at the family of Conrad Travis Logan as if we're his son, Joseph Talford Logan. Conrad Logan was president of the Rockingham Public Library Board from 1928 to 1948, and he was instrumental in starting the genealogy and local history collection at what is now Massanutten Regional Library. So I thought he would be a fun guy to start with. So we're going to start on our website, which is mrlib.org. We're going to go to our collections, special collections, genealogy, and local history. So this is where you'll find information about the genealogy resources available at MRL in person, and then our online resources are also linked here. We're going to start with Ancestry Library. We could start in Heritage Quest. We could start anywhere, but we'll start with Ancestry because that'll give us an idea of where we're going. And that can get us some low-hanging fruit. So remember, this is only available in the library. I first want to point out that they have a really helpful learning center here if you're not really sure where to get started. And then they also have some handy charts and forms. So that example I showed earlier, if you want to keep track of what you've researched and when, maybe jot down your family tree. They have some useful templates to get you started. So on the main page, we're going to click on Begin Searching. And we're going to start with Conrad Logan because in our little pretend world here, we're not really sure who his father or mother is, and we just know we're pretending he's our father, and we're going from there. So Conrad Logan, born in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Now there's a Harrisonburg in Louisiana also. Don't accidentally pick that one. And then we do know, because he's our father, what year he was born, which is 1890. And then we'll click on Search. Now I could have limited it on the previous page, and I can still do so here. But for a first search, I think just a broad one's okay. But if we needed to, we could edit the name search from broad to a range all the way down to exact. So it just uses that computer searching to search for just the name Conrad, or in this case, kind of anything that looks vaguely like Conrad. We can change our dates to plus or minus 10, 5, 2, or 1 years, or to the exact date. And then we can also change our location from broad all the way down into the country, the state, and adjacent states, just the state, just the county and adjacent counties, or the county, or that exact place. So in this case, Harrisonburg. But for our first search, I don't think we really need to tweak because we'll probably find something right off. So I'm just normally I would look for more specific order records in order. Like I would probably start by looking for a 1950 census, then a 1940, and go in a more organized fashion. But just so that we can get an idea of what the records we're looking at, I'm just going to go in order here. So we're going to start with his World War II draft registration card. This is definitely him because his birthday is correct, and his name is exact as I know it. We can see here that's transcribed, but we also can look at the full image. So this doesn't tell us much that we don't already know, presuming that, this is our ancestor. We can see where he lived in 1942 on Main Street in Harrisonburg. His next of kin is presumably his wife, so it's safe to assume we would know his wife's name at this point. And we can see that he works for the Commonwealth of Virginia at Madison College, which is now James Madison University, of course. So we can learn a little bit from that record. Next, we're going to go back and look at a census record. So the first one that comes up is the 1920 census. This one's good to look at because you can see that it says his name is Conrad F. Logan. So I think it's important to make sure that, this is the Conrad Logan we're looking for. So we're going to compare all of the information we see in the census to what we know about him. So his birth year says about 1891, and of course we know that he was born in 1890. So yeah, that's pretty close. He did live in Harrisonburg. His wife's name is Mary. So there's a pretty good chance that this is the one we're looking for. So let's click on this. You can see that they highlight him in yellow and the rest of his household in green. So here he is here, Conrad Logan. So the human or computer who transcribed this thinks that that is an F, but looking at this, I know it's a T, and I can see how it could be either a T or an F or just really bad handwriting. So you need to look out for things like this. Different censuses would keep track of different information. Most of them would at least generally have sex, race, age, and marital status. This one has a year immigrated, but of course, Conrad was born in Harrisonburg, so he did not immigrate. They ask if they could read or write. Now, these two can't because they're still children under 4. You see where the person was born and then where their parents were born. And often occupation was included. So he's a teacher at the normal school. So in the last record we looked at from 1942, he was teaching at Madison College. Well, I just happen to know that this is the same employer because it wasn't Madison College until 1938. Until then, it was the state normal and industrial school for women. So he was still at what is now JMU as far back as 1920, at least. So one other useful fact that we can glean from this record, presumably we know the names of his children already because we're acting like he's our ancestor, but we do find out that his grandmother was Addie H. Logan. So because her name, that's what this little dash means, is that the name's the same. So because her name is Addie Logan, we can probably assume that this is his father's mother. So we're going to jot that down in our notes. Now, if we want to save any of these original records for later, we can click on Save at the top corner and either email the image to ourselves or save it to the computer. Okay. Let's go back and look at some more records here. We already saw what a census looked like, so I'm going to skip this one here. I will point out that some volunteer has gone back and suggested that this is not Conrad F. Logan, it is Conrad T. Logan, so that was helpful. The next record we're going to look at is this Find a Grave Index. So this is actually from the Find a Grave website, but Ancestry has taken all of that and put it onto its platform so you can just search all in one place. So according to his gravestone, he died on January 9th, 1948. He's buried at Woodbine Cemetery, which is just up the street from Central Branch Library here. This record mentions his parents, but Because this information could have come from a contributor, just any old buddy, I prefer to verify it using an official record. So we'll make a note of those names and then come back and see if we can and verify that somewhere else. He does share a stone with Mary Jarman, so it's pretty safe to assume that that's his wife. So it's possible we have just found her maiden name. So we're going to jot that down as well. Next, we're going to look at his death certificate. I think these are some of the best records. You can get so much information, and it's pretty safe to assume that it's correct because this is a state record. All the T's had to be crossed and I's dotted. So here's his death certificate. We can see that he was in Rockingham Memorial Hospital for 6 days before his death, which was on January 9th, 1948. He died of sometimes old handwriting can be hard to read, but I believe this says he died due to a carcinoma of the prostate, metastasized to both lungs and abdomen. And his doctor had been treating him for this 2 years prior, so he had an ongoing illness. Let's see. We can see that his wife's name is Mary Harnsberger Logan. So on her gravestone it says Jarman. So we got to kind of figure out what her maiden name was there, unless he's been married to 2 different Marys. We can see that his father is John Lester Logan, which is confirming what we learned on the Find a Grave record. So that's good. And then his mother was Betty Conrad, born in Rockingham. We can probably infer that his first name came from his mother's maiden name. So that's good to point out that if you look for common names among families, that might help you find connection points. Personally, I have a lot of Corneliuses in my ancestry. So if I see a Cornelius in the general vicinity of some other family, I try and find out if there's a connection to my family. And then if we scroll down, we can see that he was buried at Woodbine on January 12th. So we learned a fair amount from this record. Let's go back and look at our search results again. So we're going to look at this Rockingham County birth register. So this is just an index, but we, see his parents again, John and BM, so that's probably Betty. Let's go back. And instead of this Rockingham record, let's look at this Virginia record. So this one actually has an image, but it's basically going to have the same information we saw on the Rockingham County transcription. So here he is, Logan Conrad, and we can see this T is a little hard to read again. They really struggled with his T there. And if we go across, we can verify again that his father is John Logan. But here we learn that his father was a clerk. So that's interesting. We don't know what business, but maybe we can keep looking and find that out. And then his mother, BM Logan. So we didn't learn too much there, but we learned his father's occupation. And now let's look at his World War I draft registration card. So he's of the right age that he was old enough for World War I, but also young enough for World War II. So he has a draft registration card for both wars. So we can see that at this point, we can verify it's him because of his name, his birth date, and his place of birth all match. And at this point, he was teaching at a high school in Cincinnati. He just had his wife and 1 child, which we know by 1920 from the census he had 2 children. One thing that I like about the World War I cards are that they give us an idea of what the ancestor looked like. So we can find out that Conrad was of medium height, slender build, with gray eyes and dark brown hair. He wasn't bald and he hadn't lost an arm, a leg, or anything like that. So we can kind of get an idea of what he looked like. Right. Let's take a look at this 1900 census. You can see on this one, some helpful person decided that they would suggest that his last name was actually Teagan, which we can tell by looking at it with our own eyes that that is just not correct and that this is Conrad T. Logan. All right. I guess I can see why they thought that was a TE. But remember, always verify it with the data you know. So, looking at this, we can kind of guess that his father probably died before 1900 because his mother, Betty, which notice is spelled differently this time than last time, is remarried to Mr. Haas. Um, his sister Margaret also lives with them, as does his stepfather's brother. It says that Mr. Haas and Betty have been married for 0 years right here. So they probably were married sometime in early 1900. So we can make a note of that and then go back and see if we can find a marriage record. And then we would know to probably look for a death record for John Logan before 1900. There's always the possibility it was a divorce, but at this time in history, it's more likely he died before 1900. So we can also see the transcription of Mr. Haas's name here says Talbot. Um, but it's also kind of got a lot of writing over top of it, and it's kind of hard to read. And I just happen to know from doing additional research and knowing Harrisonburg history that this is probably Talford Haas, which would also make sense if we remember that Conrad's son's middle name was Talford. So it's probably safe to assume that Mr. Haas had an important role in his stepson's life. You know, he married Conrad Logan's mother when he was about 10 years old. So he was probably like a father figure, you know, just from looking at those family names. Maybe that's not true, but from what we can, you know, put together from the records, we can kind of make that picture in our heads. So then I want to go and show you over here. Ancestry says that Mr. Haas's occupation is farmer. But I can very clearly see that that says lawyer. So that's just a good note to remember to not always trust the computer transcription, trust your own eyes. Maybe in the case of Talbot versus Talford, we're not really sure. It's hard to read. But I would say in this case, there is no way that says farmer. He is a lawyer. And then Conrad here is at school. But yes, Mr. Haas was quite the dignitary in his day. He was the Rockingham Page Circuit Court judge for over 2 decades. He was the Rockingham Memorial Hospital president, the Rockingham National Bank director at different times. So I'm pretty confident in my personal knowledge. And if this was your family, you might know something that would help you piece this together and know that doesn't say Talbot. All right. So let's go back and try to fill in some missing information here. You'll see that if you go up here, you can filter to different kinds of records. So I'm going to try and figure out information about his marriage. So I'm going to click on birth, marriage, and death. And then I'm going to further narrow it down to marriage and divorce. So let's click on this first record here. And this is actually a record for his son who is getting married. But because these vital records have so much information, we can see Conrad German Logan is getting married, but his father is Conrad Travis Logan, and his mother is Mary Harnsberger Jarman. So now we figured out that Harnsberger is her middle name and Jarman is her maiden name. So there's another piece of information that we can record. All right. Then if you scroll down further, you can see a lot of these don't match the information we're looking for. But this one, it talks about Professor Conrad Logan in Harrisonburg. Now, his middle initial says A, but I'm still going to look at it because we know how badly they transcribe that middle initial. And here we can see the spouse is Mary Jarman. So we can say, oh, look, I think that they were married on December 23rd, 1913. Now, this is just an index record, but if you click on source here, it'll tell you that this actually came from the Baltimore Sun on December 17th, 1913. So we could then go and try and find a copy of this Baltimore Sun article if we wanted to verify that information more fully. All right, so instead of going back to our search results, I'm going to click on search up here again and then all collections because I want to see if I can find some more information about Conrad's parents. So remember his father's name was John Lester Logan, and he definitely lived in Harrisonburg, at least when Conrad was born. So let's search. We already saw him on Find a Grave, so let's look at this second marriage, or the second record, which is a marriage record. This marriage took place in 1887, so this is just a transcript. My guess would be that the original is too fragile to be scanned, and so the information was just recorded. But we learned that John was born in 1863, and that John was married to his wife on November 9th, 1887, and his parents are Joseph T. and Addie H., which remember we saw Addie in that census record before. And then Conrad's mother, Elizabeth, which is obviously where Betty came from, she's listed here as well. It's not really intuitive, but if you click on her name, it'll actually flip the information over to her. So you can see the year she was born was 1864 in Rockingham County, and her parents are George O. and Diana S. So we learned 4 more family names just from looking at this one record right here. Well, learned 3 and verified 1. So what did we learn about the Logan family? We started with this little bit of information on the left, and we figured out where Conrad Travis Logan, when and where he was born, married, and died. We figured out his wife's maiden name. We figured out his father's full name and his mother's maiden name, as well as both when they were born and married. We figured out that his mother that married Talford Haas around 1900, which I made a note of to look further. And then we found both of his parents' names, so all 4 of his grandparents there. And we did that in just, 20 minutes or less with a really quick overview. So this is the jumping in, getting your toes wet, simple first steps of doing genealogy research. Note that as we're going through the records, we're continuing to verify that the information we have matches the information that we know. We can make notes of things we need to come back and verify, and make notes of where else we want to look and what other information that we want to look for. So as I said, this was just meant to be a very basic introduction. If you ever have any questions, you can always email the reference department at reference@mrlib.org or call us at 540-434-4475, extension 122. And you can always visit our genealogy and local history page on our website, which has tons of information to get you started.